Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Diggs. I am the Community and Partnerships Lead for RSA US. Thank you for joining us for Taking Ownership of a Sustainable Future, which is part of our monthly Salon series here in the US. Before I introduce our speaker and host for the day, I want to give a little background on the RSA, RSA US, and our Salon series. RSA stands for the Royal Society for the Encouragement of the Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, and was founded in the UK in 1754. Today, it exists as an international fellowship-driven think tank committed to providing an independent platform for debate and research on contemporary issues and topics. Of the 30,000 fellows spread out around the globe, about 1,000 live and work here in the United States. RSA US exists to coordinate the activities for those fellows, and with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. Future of work, universal basic income, and creativity in education are just a few of the areas we hope to impact. We also aim to ensure that the work of our fellows continues to be uplifted and shared, hence this monthly Salon series. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Professor C.B. Bhattacharya, FRSA, the H.J. Zoffer Chair in Sustainability and Ethics at the Katz Graduate School of Business at the University of Pittsburgh. Professor Bhattacharya is a world-renowned expert in business strategy innovation aimed at increasing both business and social value. His research and teaching focuses specifically on how companies can use under-leveraged and tangible assets, such as corporate identity, reputation, corporate social responsibility, and sustainability to strengthen stakeholder relationships and drive firm market value. Professor Bhattacharya has published over 100 articles and has over 30,000 citations per Google Scholar. His latest book, Small Actions, Big Difference, Leveraging Corporate Sustainability to Drive Business and Societal Value, was published by Routledge in 2019. He received his PhD in marketing from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania in 1993. Before joining the faculty at Pitt, he was a distinguished scholar and professor of marketing at the School of Management at Boston University, and prior to that was on the faculty at the Goethe Business School at Emory University. Before he begins, I want to remind you this session is being recorded. Please use the chat box to introduce yourself, where you're calling in from. If you're a fellow, please let us know. The chat can also be used to ask questions that I will track to make sure that the professor answers them once his presentation is over. I recommend that you use speaker view for this portion of the presentation, just so that you can see the professor and his presentation solely. And you currently do not have the ability to unmute yourself, but once we get to the discussion phase of the conversation, you will be able to do that. Without further ado, Professor Bhattacharya.
Thank you, Diggs, and welcome everyone to the Royal Society of the Arts event, Taking Ownership of a Sustainable Future. It is my great pleasure to be with you this morning and talk a little bit about my research that I've been doing over the last 5 years or so. And as Diggs mentioned, I published a book late last year, Small Actions, Big Difference, and I will introduce the book in part as we go through the talk, but I will also obviously take into account the pandemic that has created this tremendous devastation in our society, and the need for sustainability, I think, has not been, higher than this ever before. So let me start the story by going back from today to about 10 years ago, when sustainability kind of became the key word for thinking about the planet and its people. I mean, previously we were talking about corporate social responsibility, and I have been working in this space for about 25 years now, and we were all talking about corporate social responsibility. And then came this thing, well, it's not about whether you are socially responsible or not. It's really about your survival, the survival of the planet, the well-being of the planet, and the well-being of our people on this planet. And so I was in Berlin prior to being in Pittsburgh. I was in Berlin for 8 years at the European School of Management and Technology. And so circa 2010, 2011, I started teaching executives mostly on sustainability and sessions in sustainability. And I observed something quite interesting. And what I observed was most folks would say, these managers, they would come from companies like Siemens and BASF and Lufthansa and the world over. And when I asked them about sustainability, they would say, well, it's important, but it's someone else's problem. It's someone else's problem. I have more important things to do. So I have to kind of meet my targets. I have to, take care of my sales or my finances or whatever. So we have a sustainability department, and they will kind of take care of these issues. And that kind of struck me as a very interesting phenomenon. It's like, okay, I mean, our Rome is burning, literally. Rome is burning, and here we have all these Neros. I mean, they're playing the fiddle, and they're chasing, of course, they're chasing the single bottom line of profit, and profit is kind of the all important kind of metric of business success. And how can it be that we relegate the well-being of our planet and people to a single person or a single department or a few individuals within the organization when we are actually facing challenges such as this? This is climate change. We all know, we don't have to spend time talking about it. Plastics, water, income inequality, which has kind of again resurfaced with vigor during the COVID crisis, access to electricity, which 1 in 5 people don't have in the world, indoor pollution, which is becoming more and more important as a source of illness. 65 million girls across the world are out of school. I mean, which is unimaginable in this day and age. And then we get hit by this virus. And the COVID-19 pandemic really kind of gave us a few hints about our planet and its people. And I wrote this in an op-ed for the World Economic Forum. The 3 things that I kind of take away at a high level, first of all, is that the planet is kind of hurting because of man-made activity. As we could see, everybody is rejoicing from the blue skies from Beijing to to Delhi and to Los Angeles and so on. So it is man-made activity that causes these emissions. I mean, that's very clear. The second thing that became clear was on the people front, that there are tremendous inequities, not just in income, but as well in vulnerabilities. I mean, there are people who we kind of completely rely on for our livelihoods, who put their lives at risk to help us. I mean, think about the truck drivers who were carrying supplies during these last 3 months, and the nurses and the gig economy workers and so on and so forth. So, we need to build a stronger social fabric. That's very clear. And then the third thing is that 40%, as many as 40% of the businesses that got wiped out during the pandemic are not going to make a comeback because they plain cannot survive kind of, in financial terms. And what that tells us is that money or profits is definitely an important aspect of living in society, that without money, without finance, things don't really work. So, but given all this, given all these other problems that we're having, how is it possible that just a few individuals in an organization, maybe 10 people out of 100,000 or whatever, how can they actually significantly improve the situation with regard to the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit? So at a high level, I'm going to discuss the transition from the single bottom line of profit alone to the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit, because all 3 are essential for us to have a good life on this planet and to pass on a healthy planet to the future generations, which we all know is tremendously useful and important. So I set out to research essentially 2 questions. So like, why do most companies fail to embed sustainability into their business models? If as human beings, we know that without planet and without people, there really is no profit. We can't do anything with it. And we can't kind of, create financial value without the resources of the earth and human capital. So how is it that this is not getting through? Where does the failure lie? And the second question is like, what does it take for companies and their employees to take ownership of sustainability so that it's not someone else's problem, that everybody in the organization is engaged? And I choose the organization as the unit of inquiry in this research because my firm belief is if companies do not transition, again, let's go back to that earlier point of kind of most of these emissions, most of the activity, most of the social vulnerabilities, companies have a big role. I mean, if you've been reading the newspapers, you know that companies do good things, not so good things, all of that. They really control massive amounts of capital. And at this point in time, we are talking about almost a $20 trillion injection into the world economy, and much of which will be kind of parlayed through companies. So how are companies gonna use this money? I mean, and the best way, we've talked about this being a reset opportunity. So if it's gonna be a reset opportunity, many folks have talked about this sustainable future. We want to kind of use this reset to press hard on sustainability. So if that's going to happen, then more and more of us, more and more employees need to be engaged in sustainability and not pass the buck on to someone else in the organization. So with this in mind, I set out to do my research, and what I've done is kind of well over 100 interviews on kind of CEOs, C-suite members, senior managers, and then just middle managers, rank and file employees, factory workers, all of these. And these are all large public companies. These are the people who control lots and lots of capital and employ lots and lots of people. So, a company like Unilever, for example, 160,000 employees. IBM, manyfold more than that. Siemens, BASF, these are really large companies that I studied, about 25 plus companies. Going all over from Madagascar, where I studied Rio Tinto, to kind of Chile's Atacama Desert, where I studied Enel. So these are companies that are kind of all over the world. And one connection that I had was that I built this sustainable business roundtable in Berlin, where lots of these big companies would come. And over the course of about 5 years or so, I learned a tremendous amount as to why companies kind of are failing and what can be done to make things better. So the first question then, why do companies fail to take ownership? And I just want to distill this into two factors, and one is willingness and the other is ability. So there are a group of companies that are simply not willing to engage in sustainability, typically because they are backward looking and because their CEO would say, well, I have a 4-year tenure, so let me maximize on my on my retirement packet, and it's going to be the next person's problem, sustainability. So it's very easy to pass that buck. Interestingly, though, this set is smaller and smaller because of all the news in the media, peer pressure, etc. The bigger bulk, and where I think the big action, the opportunity lies, is those who are willing to say, yeah, we need to do something. We can see that the writing's on the wall, but we are just not, we kind of are not getting it right when it comes to the implementation. They are not getting it right. They don't know that they're not getting it right, but research shows that they're not getting it right. Why aren't they getting it right? Well, the first reason is they equate sustainability with the next iteration of CSR or corporate social responsibility. And that's plain wrong. Corporate social responsibility or CSR is kind of what a company does volitionally, and it does not need to engage all parts of the organization for doing its CSR. Sustainability, on the other hand, has to do with the organization's long-run survival. It has to do with the organization's long-run survival. And therefore, it necessarily engages everybody from kind of procurement all the way up to disposal. Human resources, marketing, investor relations, supply chain, everybody is a part of sustainability. So first thing is you have to break that disconnect between CSR and understand that sustainability is a different kettle of fish altogether to begin with. The second thing is companies sometimes equate sustainability to transitioning to a sustainable business model to change management. Now, nothing wrong with that per se, except that change management, as it has developed as a field, is only about profit maximization, right? So lean manufacturing, total quality management, all of it is geared towards, so the planet and the people don't really come into that change management equation. Whereas in sustainability, it really, to transition to a sustainable business, you have to buy into a different philosophy of business as to why business exists. And the fact that business exists in society to serve society, that philosophy is absolutely imperative if you want to make, if you want to transition to the sustainable business model. So that's the second disconnect. And the third disconnect is that sustainability is seen as a cost and it's not seen as an investment by many companies. Whereas it really is an investment, and there's plenty of research, including my own, to show that companies that do better on sustainability also do better on financial performance. So this ability part is the part that we can actually tackle. And from my research, what I gleaned was that the companies that got it right, and there are companies that have it right, the companies that got it right really were able to use the power of purpose, which is what I was talking about earlier, kind of why do we do what we do, or what role does business play in society, and other strategic elements and cultural elements to really fire up their employee base so that, you know, employees do take ownership. And so I hit upon this word ownership quite viscerally in my research, kind of, oh, in this company, it looks like people have ownership. So I said, okay, let me kind of look into this idea of ownership a little bit. What does ownership really mean? And interestingly, there is a whole literature on ownership, which I encourage you to look up if you're interested. And there's a concept called psychological ownership. So you don't necessarily need to own an object. You can own an idea, I mean, you know, and like sustainability, and you can take ownership kind of for the well-being, your individual ownership over the well-being of the planet and its people. And why is ownership a powerful hook? Well, it's part of the human condition. We like to take ownership because there are certain fundamental human motivations that are fulfilled by taking ownership of things, and I'll unveil that in the next slide. But we, as Jean-Paul Sartre kind of opined at one point, we are what we have, kind of, you know, the possessions are part of us and we are part of them. And the objects we own are essentially extensions of ourselves. I mean, you know, so mind you, just legal ownership is not the same as psychological ownership. I have legal ownership over my car. I do not feel a sense of ownership over my car, but I do feel a sense of ownership over my record collection, my vinyl collection, which is torn and tattered and old or whatever, but it's still something that I take pride in. I mean, it's an extension of myself, so to say. And just to give one quick example, what does ownership mean in action? And I'll take the example of PG Tips, a tea that Unilever makes. And Unilever is one of the companies I studied quite closely, and I worked closely with their CEO at the time, Paul Pullman. And so Pullman told me the story, oh, do you know that one of our workers in an UK PG Tips factory essentially came up with an innovation that suggested trimming off 3 millimeters from one of these tea bags, 3 millimeters of paper from one of these tea bags. And he said, like, look, you might think that 3 millimeters is not a big deal, but if you multiply that by the scale of the tea that we are making, in each kind of shift, they were saving 15 large reels of paper, which when multiplied over the years and so on, came out to a tremendous saving in terms of not just paper, which is a precious resource, but as well cost, because these savings, for the sake of sustainability, almost invariably also involve kind of a business benefit as well, which is a saving in cost. So that's the idea, that's the spirit of ownership that I'm talking about. You do not wait for someone else to come up with this idea. You engage in the problems in your sphere of influence. If you're in the mailroom, you do your job in the mailroom with that sustainability lens, and you properly recycle what needs to be recycled, and so on and so forth. If you're in the boardroom, you give sustainability the stature and the legitimacy that is required in the organization, and you kind of make funds, resources available for the company to invest in sustainability. So from the mailroom to the boardroom, we want this idea of sustainability ownership, so that kind of everybody engages in this problem, and it's everybody's problem, not someone else's problem. So as I was mentioning, ownership has some three fundamental drives that it kind of fulfills. And these three drives are efficacy, or the need to feel in control of our environments. We all want to feel in control of our environments. And sustainability is a great candidate there, because everybody can do something about it, starting from putting out lights or not printing or whatever, all the way up to, how do we suck carbon out of the sky, which many researchers are thinking about right now. But from the slightest individual to the biggest scientist, everybody can play a part, and that's a good thing. The second drive it fulfills is the drive for identity. We all want to project an image of ourselves, or want to believe that we care. In our personal lives, we do. And then when we get into the organizations, it's like, well, we have to don the corporate mask. I mean, this is a quote from my book. And, so we forget what we read in the newspapers and this and that, and the rhetoric becomes just about profit. So affiliating with sustainability, again, gives us a chance to express ourselves in the workplace. And that opens up all kinds of creativity and innovativeness in us. And the third need that ownership fulfills is the need for belonging. We all yearn to belong to something that's larger than ourselves, right? So I'm kind of not just a person, but I belong to a university. I belong to a family. So this sense of belongingness. And here, sustainability actually affords us the ability to find kind of meaning in life. Okay, I'm doing something for my children. I'm not sitting idle. So I am actually doing something for my family, for my children, for my workspace, whatever that is. So sustainability really does fulfill these drives that kind of, or motivations that ownership affords us. And that makes it a kind of a good candidate, a prime candidate for using this ownership hook in the organization. So that's to tell you a little bit of the rationale behind choosing this hook of ownership to instill in employees at a company. So using these ownership ideas and concepts, I unfold a model essentially which has three phases, and I will tell you, the phases in brief. Because the idea is that if you're interested, you really should be also be taking a look at the book. But the most important thing really is defining your company purpose. And we are nearly not doing enough of this, but every company has to articulate kind of, why do we do what we do? What is our raison d'etre? Kind of, and if you say we exist to make profits, then you're completely wrong. You have to find out what is it that you're doing for society. We don't sell cars, but we provide mobility. And there's a big distinction between these two. And I want to tell the story of Enel, which is a very large electric utility company based in Italy, Rome, with a significant presence in the US as well. But Enel, which is kind of transitioning now to fully being a green energy company, story from the mid 80s, when their now CEO, Francesco Storace, was a middle manager, and he was working in the Middle Eastern desert. And this is a story he tells me himself. And he says, I was there in the desert, and we are building a power plant. He said, I'm watching these trucks come down the desert road with fuel to power the plant. And then there are like, transmission lines going from the plant, but there is no load to feed on the other side. Kind of what gives? What's going on? So he did some digging, and then he finds that kind of this is all a dubious piece of social engineering. And the idea was that kind of they would, with the power plant, they would build air-conditioned tents in the desert, and the nomads from the neighboring areas would come and sit in these air-conditioned tents and watch TV, which is absolutely kind of a ridiculous thought. And he said, I realized at that point that the job of electricity is not to foist new habits on people, but rather to enable people to do what they want to do, which is a big, big, big difference. And he said, that's the moment I asked myself the question, kind of what does an electricity company do? Why does it exist? So similarly, at Unilever, people want to save lives rather than sell soap. And this is something that I was told by a factory worker there. Now, why? Because it's much more meaningful to the factory worker to save lives than to keep making more and more and more soap for the sake of profit. And like psychologically, it makes a huge difference, for individuals to be able to internalize their company's purpose as being in service to society. So inspired epiphanies. So Ray Anderson, another great example of an epiphany, where he was the CEO of this company called Interface. But he realized that kind of they were taking more away from the environment than giving to the environment. Lots and lots of stories. So every company has to ask that question of what is our purpose, and then define kind of what is material for our business. See, a financial services company might really have much more interest in something like, cybersecurity, whereas a manufacturing company might be thinking about CO2. So different companies have different priorities. So what is material? And there's a whole process for defining what's material, discovering what's material, and then choose 2 or 3 concrete goals to kind of go after. Everybody does not really need to run after just the same 3. And that's where the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs as we call them, is extremely useful, because that kind of, there are 17 goals, and you can choose 2 or 3 that are germane to your business. So this is the phase that typically, I call it the incubation phase, typically done by the leadership and then cascaded out to the organization. Sometimes you can seek employee input as well as to what the purpose of the company is, but it has to be done and then cascaded to every employee in the organization. Once you've done that, it's really the time to kind of launch your sustainability plan or program. And to be able to instill ownership, what we have to do is we have to empower our stakeholders to act sustainably. The 2 basic steps here. One is to entice or to seduce them, essentially say, hey, sustainability is cool. You should be part of the solution. And how do you do that? Well, you appeal to the head, kind of, this is the smart thing to do, or you appeal to the heart, this is the right thing to do. And oftentimes both. Well, not only does it save you money, it also saves paper. Exactly the PG Tips example that I showed you. And there are many other examples like that. In various companies, I interviewed Apple, and I heard from them, well, not only are we going to, if we can redo our packaging, we'll save, kind of precious materials, and we will save, money. So these kinds of hybrid appeals work as well. You got to use sustainability ambassadors. The leadership cannot do this alone, because we have to get into the organization, to middle management. The millennials and the younger ones are already on board, but with middle management, you really have to use sustainability ambassadors to speak to them. And there are companies like Marks and Spencer's who even go to pubs. The British, have this pub culture, and go to a pub after work and say, what are your children going to do? Have you ever thought about that? So there are different ways of kind of appealing, different strokes for different folks. But creating motivation is not enough. So you have to create ability, and that's the enable phase. And to create ability, you have to invest in training, you have to invest in management systems so that you lower the costs of acting sustainably. And at the same time, you increase the benefits by promoting people, giving them more financial incentives, whatever it is. So you alter the cost benefit balance. And it is only by doing that that you can make it everyone's job. And one of the quotes I have in the book is that make no exceptions, because if you have one exception in the organization, everyone thinks that they are that exception. So no exceptions. Sustainability has to be everybody's job. And there are cultures like that, as I said, that I have seen. And then the last phase would be to entrench or embed this sustainability culture so that it becomes routine, right? We don't have to think. Like today, most of us don't have to think twice about putting off the lights. Similarly, we can get to the phase where we don't have to think twice before integrating sustainability into our decision making, whether we are investing in plant and machinery, whether we are thinking of our disposal, whether we are thinking about our manufacturing process, whatever it is just built in. How do we get there? One key thing is to communicate progress. What progress have we made, right, in this field? Kind of keep telling them all the time, look, your guys are making a difference. And I've seen companies where you open up the laptop, get a pop-up saying, hey, did you know we've reduced our CO2? But I've gone to factories where they have whiteboards with kind of, saying today's progress, kind of this is what we have done today. So keep at it, keep communicating. Co-create solutions with your employees. So give employees the creative autonomy that they need to come up with innovations themselves and co-create solutions with them. And that routinizes this kind of behavior over time. And very importantly as well, kind of celebrate successes. I put up Plan A. I mean, Marks and Spencer's here, their signature plan, sustainability plan is called Plan A, because there is no Planet B or Plan B. And they have really these Oscar-style red carpet celebrations to pick out individuals who've gone that extra mile on sustainability, and these folks are rewarded publicly. Companies like NL even celebrate failures. So they're saying that if we don't celebrate our failures, that means we are not, if we don't fail and if we don't talk about failures, that means we're not trying hard enough in sustainability. So they have something called the My Best Failure Award every year. I was actually lucky to be in Rome the day they were giving out those awards. There were 500 people in the audience. The CEO himself was actually giving out those awards, which are voted in by fellow employees. So these steps go a long way to kind of create the culture of sustainability, as does this last one. And the COVID crisis, again, brought to bear the importance of collaboration. So the final step is to expand this sense of sustainability ownership. So it's not our company, but really our planet. Because difficult problems, wicked problems like deforestation cannot be solved by one company alone. So you got to get the Unilevers, the PepsiCos, the Coca-Colas, the Colgates, all these big players together, right? And you have to build platforms. And that's exactly what is possible with this idea of sustainability ownership. There's a concept called collective ownership as well that grows out from the individual. And you need to put sustainability in the pre-competitive space. And so I have an example of the RSPO, the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, and really many big companies, several of the ones I mentioned, including Nestle and other big food companies. Palm oil is something that's used in lots and lots of things. And palm oil, harvesting palm oil causes deforestation, which leads to global warming. And so there are big teams now working, but putting sustainability in the pre-competitive space is extremely important to save our planet. And there are many other collaborative problems like effluents, e-waste, conflict minerals, and several examples are provided in the book as well. So I just want to finish on this thought that, this is not about us. I mean, at least I am, have been working in this space for many years, and I don't know how many good years I have in front of me. But my son, he's 16, And he is out there protesting climate, he's out there protesting guns, he's out there protesting racial justice. What kind of a world am I gonna, try and leave for him? So at least if we don't do it for us, let's do it for our children, for our grandchildren, the citizens of the earth who are going to come after we are gone. Not suggesting that you guys on the other side will be gone, because most of you are way younger than me. So this is the book, which obviously has a lot more detail than what I talked about. And if you haven't taken a look at the book, I would certainly urge you to do so as soon as it is convenient. But with that, I thank you for your attention and for your time. You're welcome to keep in touch with me by any means you want. But again, thank you for listening, and I shall turn it over to Diggs.
Thank you, Professor. For folks who are on the call, I will be allowing you to unmute yourself if you have comments. I also encourage you to shift to gallery view so you can see, and if you're comfortable being on video so we can see you, that would be wonderful as well. I will note, Jaspal, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, that your comment on co as a prefix. I don't know if Jaspal, you'd wish to unmute yourself to speak more to that. Before I turn to other questions, I'll give you a second to see if you would like to speak.
Yes, Robert, I would. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just as I heard Professor Bhattacharya talk, realized that logically the mind is able to wrap itself around the need for sustainability. But he again and again was reminding us that there has been a lot of potential left untapped because of the lack of ownership or the lack of synergy when many different people across silos and across ecosystems come together. So for me, therefore, if there was just one thing I was picking up, it was just this ability for all of us to pick up the prefix co, C-O. We are together in everything. And if that message you can sort of get a little deeper, it would release a lot of synergy, which the professor was hinting at, we have not yet been able to release. There's a lot of synergy once we come together and put our heads, hearts, hands to it.
Well said, Jaspal, and thank you for joining me on the other side. Indeed, I'd never thought about the power of co, but you're absolutely right. And maybe we want to kind of, co-own and co-celebrate and everything. So co as a I had not thought about before today that it's the power of the prefix. So thank you for bringing that to all of our attention. And indeed, it's, we should think of everything together. We are stronger, essentially. And that's a very powerful philosophy to go with. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for your appreciation.
Come on, people. I don't bite.
Any other thoughts and comments, reflections?
If I could add a question, please.
Sure. Claudia has a question, but go ahead while Claudia types or wishes to speak. So go ahead.
But she can also verbally say it, right? You guys don't have, everybody doesn't need to type it.
Claudia can go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Hello, Claudia, you're on the air.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor. Thank you for this wonderful talk. I have a question. I work as a diplomat to the UN, so I'm very familiar with the SDGs because, I was there when they were being negotiated. So thank you for that. How do you find that these companies that have this sustainability mindset work together or not work or collaborate with their competitors? So when it comes to partnerships and competition and let's work together and collaboration, what does that look like in companies that have adopted a sustainability mindset, especially when it comes to, COVID and the need for collaboration and all this. I find it very interesting. Do you have any thoughts to share on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So collaborating with competitors is an extremely difficult, in the sense that, again, if you've only thought of profit and maximizing, if you only thought of self-interest, essentially, and your individual organization, then it's that much harder to collaborate with competitors. The way to collaborate with competitors, or to make that kind of initial step, is to kind of realize that it is not about the individual, but it is about the collective. It is about the collective, that we are together as a society, and that if we do not join hands, we will not be able to solve these problems. Like, I mean, if you really just think about deforestation, when one ingredient is used by lots and lots of different kinds of companies, with palm oil as an example, so what motivates now Nestle and Unilever, for example, both of whom have lots of food products, to collaborate? Well, it's kind of, they're both saying, they've both realized that if we do not, the cost of inaction is higher than the cost of, the cost of inaction is higher. So the planet will go bust. So it's not about us, it's about the collective. And oftentimes people will seek a neutral ground to have these conversations. And this is where NGOs come in most useful. So someone like a Greenpeace will actually conduct or moderate that meeting, and that makes the companies feel safer, and that they are kind of in a safe space and they can open up. So it's the most difficult step, and it's incredibly difficult for companies to open up and really talk about their challenges. But again, when they realize that really the collective is far, far more important than the individual company. And so one of the quotes in my book is that if everything fails around us, we fail too. So that philosophy has to, and that's the power of purpose, that philosophy that the collective is more important than the individual really comes when you define your purpose and you realize that you exist to serve society and not the other way around. Once that realization clicks in, the other parts follow. But it's easier said than done. But there are some clear tips on how to achieve, and I just told you a few of those. And we are seeing more and more, and COVID certainly requires us to collaborate much more. And there is a race to the vaccine and all of that, the race to the vaccine is great as long as it is about saving lives. The race to the vaccine is not great if it is just about kind of who can make the most amount of money. So these philosophical differences we need to keep hammering to companies and other entities, kind of, where what really looks, what needs to be done rather for us to survive as a species. It all starts with purpose. Next question. Just Paul had a question, I thought, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just Paul.
Yeah. The thought in my mind, Professor, and all colleagues on this call was the triple bottom line has been around for over 2 decades, probably, as a focus or as a concern. But when it came initially, it did enamor a lot of people, but very quickly the word profit started standing out and the words people and planet started fading out. In the post-COVID world, where we all have an opportunity to have a reprioritization of things, is there a possibility to fully understand and then communicate the power that resides behind the word people first, or even bigger, planet first? Is there a way to start communicating in real terms how it will add to profits and therefore generate power behind these 2 words? It's not just a feel-good aspect that People and planet needs to be looked after. As the professor was saying, corporate social responsibility tended to fall into just charity. This is not charity. We are going to do things because it makes a difference. Can we quantify how much we can make through planet first, people first, and profits will be just an outcome?
Yeah, a very good point, Jaspal. I would submit that we have done research. I talked about the research. So there is evidence, clear evidence that companies that do better in terms of environmental performance and in terms of social performance, they also do better in terms of financial performance. Now, slowly we are trying to we are making inroads into investors and being able to convince them about this. So see, as soon as the investor world starts pricing people and planet more aggressively, the companies are gonna turn, because they really, even if they have the wrong motives, they live for the financial markets and the analysts that essentially control them or whatever. It's a weird system. I'm not in favor of that. But when investors, and they're already doing, and I see on LinkedIn, Morningstar, and other financial organizations touting their responsible investing, and that ESG fund. So one of the interesting things that came out post-COVID is that ESG funds, were more resilient to the companies, to the crisis, compared to our regular company funds. So companies that were investing specifically in environmental, social, and governance mechanisms, they perform better. Now, this is the kind of news that needs to make the headlines of the Wall Street Journal, of Business Week, of the New York Times, and so on and so forth. We are getting maybe tiny mentions here or there, but we are not getting the attention this research deserves. But it is my belief that it is only with, if we keep pounding and we keep talking, and the more we talk, and the more we, post things on social media from the talks, the bigger a chance we have to make this mainstream. Because the evidence is there, and there is more and more evidence coming. Investors are listening, but they're listening slowly. And every investor is not a long-term investor. That's the problem. There are all kinds of investors in the market. Day traders couldn't give a whole lot about sustainability. So why did Unilever stop quarterly reporting? Unilever stopped quarterly reporting because it said, well, we don't need the investors who will actually just monitor us from quarter to quarter, because that's a distraction from the long term. And when they stopped quarterly reporting, there was quite an outrage in the financial market, and several investors left Unilever. But the company over time attracted a different kind of investor, a longer term investor who saw potential. And over time, it has outperformed its competition. Just 2 days ago, the company announced that it was going to put on each of its brands, on every packaging, it would say how much CO2 is being emitted from that particular product. So they're very, very innovative, and so on and so forth. But so the only option we have is to keep talking about it, have people such as yourself talking about it, have the other folks who are listening to this talk about it, so that over time, this becomes part of mainstream thought and practice. I could not agree with you more that doing well on people and doing well on planet does more in profit. It is short-termism. That's, again, one of these devils, societal ills that we have to live with. But it's just Robert the Bruce and the spider. We got to keep on keeping on, and hopefully one day the spider will actually be able to climb up the wall. Right.
Thank you for that. Katie, you had a question about corporate transparency you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I thought it was particularly interesting in the current context where companies being held accountable in terms of diversity, but obviously it has, you know, a much bigger role to play in terms of people and commitments to sustainability and social progress in general. And would love to just hear a little bit if you believe that some of the calls for companies to be more transparent about their data, about how they're performing, could actually be a trigger to further progress.
Absolutely, absolutely it could, and we should be insisting on it. I gave an interview on this a few days ago to Politico. Consumers should be insisting on it. Employees should be insisting on seeing all the data with regard to not just environmental and social, but absolutely with regard to D&I metrics in terms of kind of, you know, what is the proportion of you know, managers, this, that come from different communities, all of that data. And I believe that we should be at the point, the only way to change things is to vote with our wallets, you know, and certainly as well vote, and that's for the companies, but as well vote for better regulators and a better government and so on. But definitely support companies that are doing better on those metrics that where we are hurting. It is, you know, the Business Roundtable in the United States came out with a statement, a diversity and inclusion statement, which was shockingly shallow, because there was no accountability. They were not really pressing for anything. They were just saying, we'll give, you know, millions of dollars, we're going to fix education, we're going to do this, you know, hogwash. I mean, you know, it's you really need to, you know, actually put steps in place and hold companies accountable for not doing that. So I think that the call for data is a very important call, and I do think that we can learn a lot by, you know, by looking at companies, that data, those kinds of data, and taking every action we can once we see the data to support those who are doing well, and you know, quote unquote, punish those who are not. So now Alexa is a force in this field, and I will now ask Alexa to chime in and tell us a little bit about kind of, you know, the work that she has been doing. Alexa.
No, CB, thank you. I really appreciate your presentation. I thought it was very hard hitting and picks up on so many of the issues that we've been wrestling with, you know, for a decade, 15 years in this space. I really liked your concepts, particularly of psychological ownership, because I think so many of the entrepreneurs that we work with, it is about them taking off their masks and showing up as these humans and bringing their humanity into the workplace. And I think there's a bit of a social contract, if I think about it, around the psychological ownership piece, because, you know, I was speaking to someone who worked at innovation at Nike for his whole career, and he felt ultimately deeply betrayed by the company. And so I wonder, just as employees are investing psychologically and feeling that sense of ownership and contributing their, you know, their hearts and souls and passions to these companies, I think there is a responsibility that the companies have towards, in some cases, tangible ownership. So looking at different kinds of, you know, stakeholder capitalism type structures, or employee ownership schemes. And then also, you know, in terms of a bigger license to operate. And so how can we, you know, I think this experience of betrayal is not unique to that Nike entrepreneur. I think, you know, I think lots of employees end up feeling this at some point in their career. And so maybe there's a new social contract that needs to emerge between employees who have that deep, you know, commitment and investment and the behaviors of companies. And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are around that, around what that social contract is looking like.
Yeah, so the social contract, and thank you, Alexa, those are really insightful comments. I mean, if you look at the employee engagement numbers, I mean, employee engagement, a few years, it's rising suddenly for some reason, but by and large, it's been extremely low. So like, 15 to 20% of employees of any organization are engaged in some sense. Double that number are disengaged and actively badmouth the company to friends, relatives, and peers, and so on. That tells you something. That tells you that there is no meaning at work. There is no meaning. They're not deriving any sense of meaning. Now, that's the average company. In contrast, I mean, some of these companies that I've studied have employee engagement at 80%. Kind of why is that? And that can be traced to kind of what that social contract is between the employee and the employer. And how many people hear, how many employees in a company actually hear about the true purpose of that company? Now, in hospitals and settings like that, life-saving situations, you hear about that. But even in educational institutions, which I belong to, I mean, we forget what so it's about the rankings. We want to jump in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times rankings of business schools, but that's a false motive as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we want to create responsible leaders in a business school. If that helps us in the ranking, fine. If it doesn't, too bad. So there is a fundamental difference, I think, when it comes to the corporations of this world, and Nike is not an isolated example at all. I mean, there are many, many examples where the social contract is like, you work for me, I pay you a salary. Giving you meaning, giving you the sense of belongingness, giving you an identity as a result of working, for XYZ corporation is not thought of as part of the social contract. And I think we absolutely need to educate folks who are running these companies to get to that point that, no, the social contract between you and your thousands of employees is not just money, it's not just sick leave or whatever. I mean, those are extremely important. They're necessary, but they're not sufficient. And there are certain psychological kind of hooks of like belonging, like purpose, like identity that one has to tap into at all levels of the organization, I feel, to develop this new social contract. And if I would be most interested in continuing this conversation with anybody who on this call who wants to do that later. And now we have something on B Lab from Emily. Emily, you wanna? Oh, there's already some agree, Emily, going on. So I don't know. Diggs is the master of ceremonies here. So
yes, Emily was mentioning that when she worked at B Lab, that there was an initial focus on Better Business campaign, but that they switched to exclusively working with working with workers to improve their company practices. And I would just like to say thank you to Professor Bhattacharya, thank you to Katie, Jasper, Claudia for speaking up, and Emily and Alexa for chiming in. But we are officially over, but as I said, if people want to hang out and chat, if the professor has time, I am not opposed.
Thank you. Thank you, Diggs. And thank you for the opportunity. I just want everyone to remember that small actions lead to big difference. So do what you can in your sphere of influence, whatever that is, including telling your networks about this talk, about the importance of purpose, whatever it is you can do. I think we just want to continue the good fight. And if you're interested, if this book is in your kind of area of interest, I do hope you will take a look at the book as well. Okay. Thank you.